Hello, I'm Jenn Wilson, Senior Programmer at Film Independence. Welcome to this Film Independent Presents Q&A for the documentary The Janes by Tia Lessin and Emma Pildes. Special thanks to our lead sponsor, the HIFPA, and our virtual screenings partner, Vision Media. Now, please welcome today's guests, Directors Tia Lessin and Emma Pildes, and film subject and original member of Jane, Diane Stevens.
Hi.
Yay!
Yay.
Personal applause from me. I really appreciated this film so much. Tia and Emma, do you want to start by talking about how you came to make a film on this subject matter?
Tia, should we change it up? Why don't you want to take it this time?
How do you make a film on this? Very carefully. Look, we had very little to go on in terms of imagery for the pre-Roe era. There was the coat hanger and all that came with it. And what Emma and I were drawn to this story because it's such a extraordinary story of resistance, and sisterhood. And it also is a great drama. And so we really wanted to lean into the caper aspect of this film, into the levity of the women of Jane, and also really clearly informed by the urgency of this moment where as we were making the film and as we were releasing the film, abortion rights, were coming to an end in this country.
Reasons we wanted to make the film was for all of what Tia just said. But I have a family connection to the film, so this is something that I've known about for most of my life. And my brother, who is also a producer on the film, a producer in the world and a producer on the film, he actually started developing the film right around when Trump got into office. He just saw the immediate need. He had the foresight. I mean, there were so many things that were being threatened pretty immediately when Trump got into office. And that the fact that he immediately started packing the courts and had his eye on the prize with the high courts and changing the composition of the high courts seemed obvious. And this was something that we had in our back pocket, in our backyard, and that we could use, that seemed of use to this fight. We're filmmakers. This is our skill set. This is what we can contribute. And so we wanted to give a platform to these women, these incredible women, to bear witness and tell the story of what they saw and what they felt and what they had to do. Last time, 50 years ago, women in this country didn't have a right to choose. So it just seemed so necessary and something that we could accomplish. And because of, this sort of second piece of bravery by the women, their willingness to sit in front of the cameras and tell the story of their illegal activity from 50 years ago. And because of the smarts of HBO and the matriarchy that runs things over there, Tia and I were able to direct this film. And the film came out on HBO in June, which is the same month that we lost Roe. So in the nick of time isn't the right way to say it, but it was quite an experience to watch these two things sort of happen simultaneously.
Yeah, so my next question was going to be, did you have any idea that Roe v. Wade might be overturned by the time the film came out? So it sounds like you really did think that it might happen by the time this was finished.
Yeah, it seemed, look, there's been a constant erosion of abortion rights, since 1973, since Roe. And, by 2016, it was clear that the extremists, the fundamentalists, had their eyes on this decision. And and we were racing against the clock and against the pandemic to get this film out before we lost the federal guarantee for abortion rights altogether. But we also wanted to tell a different kind of story. There's been some great films about abortion that have been made in the documentary community and the fiction community, and the story, was a particular one that we felt, needed to be told in this moment. But we really wanted to do justice to it, cinematically and filmically, and these voices, I think, were just too important to lose.
So this film draws heavily on archival. It's fantastic archival. Just a whole lot of footage that I don't think I've ever seen. Had either one of you ever done an archival doc before? And you want to talk about like what are the differences between working on an archival doc and a doc that's like contemporary, where you're not using any footage from the past?
Yeah, well, these women weren't filming, their activities at the time. They were engaged in illegal work, and they were all about the work, so they weren't taking photographs or film footage. So, that was a fun challenge for us to represent this visually without, resorting to reenactments. We had the benefit of, delving into some very, very rich collections, the Chicago Historical Society among them, and local news and television film collections. But Emma and I have had a deep background in archival research. Emma with Susan Lacey and her beautiful biopics and American Masters. So Emma was the producer of the Jane Fonda film, Steven Spielberg film, of a John Lennon film. So, and I, have done a lot of work with archival through my work with Michael Moore and other filmmakers. So we knew our way around the archives. And I think the challenge was that we were doing this during COVID. So there was a bit of a limit to our access with these collections. But we found some extraordinary things. Neither of us had seen this footage before of abortion providers and the women they serve being rounded up around the country, and brought to the precincts, brought to courts, and then eventually to prison. And we really wanted to spotlight that footage because that's what's going to happen, in this moment.
Yeah.
And but this was happening in the 60s, and we'd never before seen this footage. We also, found footage of the Cook County Hospital during that era. Again, this horrific footage of, of, of women who were harmed by botched abortions or self-induced abortions, and were dumped at this public hospital in Chicago. And we heard stories about it, but we were able, thanks to a film crew that had shot the footage in 1971, we were able to actually see what that looked like.
Yeah,
I
I'm
just want
sorry,
to
go
add
ahead.
one thing, which is just that our editor, Kristen Huntley, did such an extraordinary job with the archive, the care and nuance of bringing it all together, which is it's very hard, I mean, all documentary filmmaking is very hard, but it's a special thing to be able to evoke a time and a feeling and a moment and have feet firmly planted in that, and then be carried through by seated interviews. And it was so important to us to really lock into that time and lock into that moment, to make this moment real, so that we could understand what it felt like and think about it in our contemporary situation. So I just a shout out to Kristen Huntley that just did such an incredible job weaving
Editors
it all
are
together.
extremely important in many things, but I feel
third,
like
yeah.
especially documentary.
Absolutely. And we really wanted to bring Chicago to life. We wanted to look at the context of these women's lives, not only of the Janes, but the women they were serving, and, the civil rights movement, the student movement, the anti-war movement, and the city of Chicago were just such a vivid backdrop
Yeah.
to what the Janes were doing. And we are grateful to Cartemquin Pictures that shot a lot of footage that we used from that time period, and also to Vivian Mayer, whose collection resides in part at the Chicago Historical Society, and to Joanne Elam, an experimental filmmaker whose work we also drew on, as well as a bunch of other
That's amazing.
professional and amateur filmmakers.
So I want to ask, for the actual Jane that we have here. Thank you for coming today. I think that your work is really special. Oh, actually, you mentioned two things that I was really shocked to hear about in the film was that Cook County had a ward for people who had tried to self-abort, which was extremely telling, and makes me wonder if hospitals are going to have to go back to doing that in the current condition. But the other thing that I noticed in the film was someone says that women weren't allowed to be pregnant in the workplace. And you use an example of like a secretary. Someone said it just wouldn't have been appropriate for a pregnant, visibly pregnant secretary to be sitting like at her typewriter. And I had never actually heard that. I'm a person who had a grandmother who was like vice president of a bank, and had three daughters throughout her career. It just makes, she's not alive today, but it just makes me wonder, like, was she moved to the back in this time? Because this was the time period, like, did they have to hide her when she was pregnant? So I'm just wondering, if there's, Diane, if you can give any insights about what it was that seeing visibly pregnant women in the workplace was so unacceptable.
Well, I guess I can't really speak to that. I didn't have that experience. Some of the older women in the group spoke to that pretty effectively, but I never had that experience. I'd also look at the issue of class, like maybe a woman that was a higher up in a bank was able to get away with more than a woman who might have been like me, who would have been on a much lower level kind of clerical job. But I didn't personally have that experience.
Emma and Tia, did you have any thoughts about why women couldn't be visibly pregnant in workplaces?
I mean, well, I know teachers couldn't be visibly pregnant. They were fired immediately. They couldn't show in front of children as if it were, somehow pornographic. I don't know.
Okay.
There also, I mean, we saw that story told to a certain degree in the Desi and Lucy film that Amy Poehler made, that
Right.
that it was unacceptable for the pregnancy to be shown on national television. So there was a fight that they had with the executives, and they, ultimately Lucy was able to show her pregnant self. But
right, as if being pregnant was considered obscene in that time period, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that we wanted to include in the film like that, like you couldn't get birth control unless you were married.
Right.
So one of the women in the film tells a story of going to Woolworth and getting a fake band and putting it on her left finger so she could go in and get birth control. I mean, it was just a different paradigm, and we wanted that to be understood, that there was a time where you couldn't have your own credit card as a woman. There was a time where you couldn't have a mortgage as a woman, that because in addition to not knowing the history of abortion and not being in touch with a time when women didn't have this right, so many generations don't know that stuff either. I mean, we learned so much. You know, there was many revelations for us, the extent to which women weren't trusted to make decisions for themselves in their own lives, whether they be financial or reproductive.
Right.
And showing that entire paradigm was very important to us, because that also sets the stakes, right? And that shows, it also shows, you know, what it took for the women of Jane coming out of being told that they weren't as smart, or they weren't as dependable, or they weren't as whatever the case may be. And as Diane pointed out, you know, it does change within one, you know, a very short period of time, as far as, you know, when the women's movement came into play. That stuff progressed sort of quickly, but the fact that these women were coming out of a time when they were being told all of those things and had to overcome that to have confidence in themselves to then save these women's lives, it becomes even more heroic, you know. So I think it was important to us to show all of those things.
And they were being marginalized not just by the society at large, but by their own movements, by the student movement and the anti-war movement, and some cases the civil rights movement. And out of that came, you know, these fiercely principled women who had some significant skills and resources, and applied them to this direct action. And men worked with them, but they relegated those men to the helper roles that they had experienced. You know, they were the helpers of the other movements. And so I sort of took a certain delight in seeing them relegate the men to those roles.
So for Diane, if women today need to form a Jane collective to help people in red states get abortions, I guess my question is, do you think it's possible that they could make a collective like Jane in the 2020s?
Absolutely. I mean, we weren't very special, and we came up with this whole apparatus of training being each other's friends and mentors and training each other. I feel like if we could do it, anyone could do it, really, if with determination. And in fact, things are happening right now. Like there's the group in Chicago, wearejane.org, which is a fantastic website to look at, who's out there doing, reaching out wherever they can to help people that are pregnant find options. There's the group in Mexico that's distributing pills. I mean, there's people doing things right now. And I would say I only know the tiniest sliver of it. But I have to tell you that I'm in a group in Charlotte, and I was called the Reproductive Rights Coalition. And in that group, there's someone that's really very good with the media and puts up TikToks. And I just looked at the one that they did for the movie, and the background music for it is, the refrain is, "Let's get it started again." And it just really cracked me up when I heard it. It was something by the Black Eyed Peas. I just laughed. I've got to call her up. What are you thinking? Let's get it started again. So there's things happening right now.
I'm wondering if you think the repercussions were pretty heavy for the Janes in the end, because you all had to go to jail for a time. I'm wondering if you think the repercussions now for people aiding and abetting abortions are going to be more severe, or does that really depend on who's our next president?
I think the repercussions were really minimal. I went to jail for one night. I mean, that isn't that isn't much. I mean, I'm not saying it was fun or anything, but that's really pretty minimal. What people are facing now is so much worse. I mean, like, like the women in Alabama. There was an article in The Guardian recently about the women in Alabama that happened to be pregnant and are arrested for some minor drug offense and end up jailed for a part of their pregnancy to supposedly protect the pregnancy. And the feeling is so awful. People are just so vindictive. It's so much worse now than it was 50 years ago when I was arrested.
Well, yeah, and I mean, some of these laws are extraordinarily draconian. You know, there is the criminalization of people crossing state lines to provide abortions. So there are abortion doctors that are never going to be able to set foot in Texas or Oklahoma who live in New York City because they may be prosecuted. In Texas, there's a bounty offered if you turn in your neighbor or your coworker or your family member, if you suspect they're aiding and abetting, complicit some way in helping a person get an abortion. So, you know, that was never embedded in these laws before Roe. And now we're talking about a federal ban, a federal abortion ban, you know, if the fundamentalists and the extremists get their way. So I think it's quite sobering. And, you know, but Diane, you could have spent 110 years in jail. Or, you know, I mean, you
Well,
were
I don't think I
facing,
lived that long.
that's right. I mean, but you were facing a lot of prison time. And, you know,
Right.
thanks to Roe, you got off, but it wasn't necessarily going to be that way.
Well,
Yep.
I,
Did you feel, did it feel pretty serious that you could face a lot of prison time at that time?
but you have to remember, I was very young and I was very naive. I was only, you know, in my like 21, 22 years old. So I was really young and naive. I felt at the time, looking around my co-defendants, as they say, you know, the other women I was arrested with, I was a good one to have to go to jail if anyone did. I didn't have children. I didn't have a family that was particularly worried about me. I felt like, well, if I had to go to jail because I did something illegal, so be it. You know, that's the way it would be. That's how I felt now, and I still feel that way. I mean, I'm really glad I didn't have to go to jail because I've had a really great life, but people have to accept the consequences of their actions, and I knew exactly what I was doing was illegal.
So you got off because Roe v. Wade passed and it was no longer illegal to perform
That's right.
abortions. Is that way?
That's right. We had a bunch of court appearances, but eventually it was all dismissed. So that was good. That was a good thing. But I feel like the stakes are so much higher now. They're so much higher for everyone. They're higher for the pregnant women that might want the pregnancy they're having, and for some reason it's not safe for them. The baby's dead, or it's an ectopic. It's just bad for everyone now.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I think I interrupted you. Emma, were you saying something?
No, I was just reflecting on what Diane was saying, which is, you know, just the injustice of all of that, you know, that she was barely 20, Diane, is that right?
Yeah. I was a babe.
And feeling it and taking on her young shoulders, filling a gap for the healthcare system because they're not willing to value women's lives. So a 20-year-old, you know, she's here now saying, well, I would have had to accept the consequences for my actions. It's just so infuriating that the consequences for her actions of filling a void for the US government and for the US healthcare system could have possibly been 110 years in prison, and that she had to accept that as a notion of punishment. It's just so backwards, and it's hard. You know, we were working on this film for a very long time, so I think Tia and I have moments of of being shocked that we're in a time where something like that is happening. It's not even going to happen. It is happening, and that people are gonna be having to make these decisions. It's frustrating.
And the people that it's impacting the most are low-income people, disproportionately people of color and rural communities, and people, you know, that haven't had access to abortion care for many years now. So we tried to, you know, we saw that historically, we saw that in the film when New York legalized abortion, who was left behind in Chicago. You know, it was low-income women, it was poor women, it was predominantly Black women. And it's such an injustice that is playing out right now in these states.
Tia and Emma, do you see the film as being a tool or a weapon against what is happening right now? Are you hoping is the result of people seeing it?
Yeah, go ahead, Tia.
Well, look, films are ways to engage people, you know, emotionally and in a conversation, you know. And so we really hope that, you know, people are moved, you know, in some cases to laughter in the film, but, you know, also, you know, to really seriously, you know, feel what it was like then and what it may be like now, and hopefully engage in conversation, maybe think differently. Maybe it'll move them to go to the polls this November, because what's happening on the state and national level is going to make a big difference in people's lives and women's lives. So there's always that hope. But look, we're artists. We can't really control what people do with what we do. We can put our work out there as filmmakers, and hope that films like this and other films can engage people, and then, you know, whatever they do with it, you know, hopefully there's some good.
I've seen a lot of films on different aspects of this subject matter over the years, and some things that I've seen recently seem to be trying to give the pro-life movement more of a platform. Well, not more of a platform, but they're showing a lot of footage of people on the pro-life side in saying, you know, we really sort of need to understand more about what we're up against. Do you have any opinion about whether you think those kinds of films are very effective?
This keeps coming up. It's really interesting. I mean, I think what it boils down to is something that I do believe in, which is dialogue. For a healthy democratic republic, I think it's important for different opinions and sides to be trying to understand each other. That's healthful for us. You know, I do believe that. I don't feel like Tia or I felt the need to both sides it in this film. I don't feel as a documentary filmmaker that it's a requirement or my responsibility. I'm not a news journalist. You know, it didn't really come up. We were telling this story. We didn't need to both sides it. The story is the story. That, you know, this is just full of facts. Septic wards across the United States existed, and they were full all the time, and women were dying every day. That's just the facts. I don't really even know how to both sides that.
Yeah.
But, you know, I support dialogue, and I support a well-reasoned, truthful argument for your opinion, or your, you know, I mean, I support all of that. But it's a really interesting question that I've been thinking a lot about. We got a question from a journalist recently talking about, I can't remember which film, but it was a anti-choice film, that he said was not very good. He said, but what are our boundaries for what if there was one that was well made?
Yeah.
You know, is that going to be supported by us? Are we going to watch it? So it's a really interesting question that I'm really glad we're talking about.
Yes.
You know,
I would just add that I think that the anti-abortion movement has gotten a disproportionate amount of coverage in the media, and you know, given the fact that the vast majority of people in this country believe in a woman's right, you know, to decide whether and when and with whom to have a child, and most people don't even know that fact, that the anti-abortion fundamentalists, extremists, are in the minority, and yet they have so much political power, they have so much representation on screen, and the images that they've bandied about, the graphic, dishonest images of fetuses, you know, have taken the main stage. And so we're really doing a course correction here. We're telling the stories of women who have been denied this decision or have had to fight for their right to make choices in their lives, fundamental choices about healthcare, you know, about the course that their lives will take. And so I think that it's incumbent on us to tell these stories, because there's been too much of the other stories out there in the media.
Yeah.
I just want to say I totally agree with that, with what Tia and Emma just said, and the language, this pro-life language. Well, I'm in favor of life.
Yeah.
You know, we're all pro-life, and if you think about this, the anti-abortion people as being in favor of forced childbirth, forced birthing, no choice, anti-choice. Because abortion is healthcare. Abortion, it's so, you know, that's so interesting to think about a good anti-abortion movie or a well-reasoned. I don't even know what that would mean. And I give you a lot of credit for being willing to engage in dialogue, because I have no interest in dialogue at this point. I just say, if you don't want to have if you don't like the idea of abortion, then don't have one.
Yeah. So for Diane, are you still involved in activism? And if you haven't been, will the current situation pull you back into activism?
Well, it's kind of funny the way it all worked out, because I was involved in, I became a healthcare provider, and I worked mostly with people that were underserved, if you call that activism, you know, just trying to talk to people about healthcare as much as I could and trying to help them out. But I moved to North Carolina. I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, and in my desire to get involved in something, I joined a group that is called the Reproductive Rights Coalition, that in which the members of the group act as escorts for women going to abortion clinics. And it was because of that experience and seeing these fervent evangelicals who scream at women trying to enter a clinic to get health care that I decided to participate in the movie, because I really hadn't even talked about it, you know, my whole healthcare, you know, my whole life really, and since I had done it. So now I am active again, but I guess I make a joke that I was like a sleeper. And when it came up, you know, I got involved again, and now that's why I decided to participate in the movie, because of the horrors that I saw in North Carolina, in Charlotte, people using Bibles to amplify their voice, to yell at women and tell them that they were going to be going to hell. That was why I participated in the movie, and that's what I've been doing with myself lately.
Thank you So I want to say thank you so much for making this film. And Diane, thank you for being a Jane. Just the fact of the existence of this group has, you know, you listen to the news every day and you start to feel very down about our prospects, but this movie made me feel so hopeful about who we really are and what really can be done. So I thank you for that, because getting trapped in the grief in the mourning of losing our rights is not going to help us get our rights back. So thank you so much. Thank you for being here and speaking so eloquently about your film. I wish you good luck on award season.
Thank you.
And thank you so much.